Thanks, Gal. Hi, everyone. If you joined us a minute ago, you realized I'm having trouble with my desktop, so I'm on my phone, so bear with me. And full disclosure, this is my first Zoom meeting. So to lead, so give me some grace here. So welcome today. I'm so glad to see a lot of you, and I recognize some names, and I appreciate you all being on today on this Thursday afternoon, sorry. Yeah, lost track of time. So victims of child sexual exploitation, let's peel back the layers of risk factors. So thank you, Gal. You can go on. So today, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to get a better understanding of how and why youth are victimized. Saying that, since I work for the Tulsa County Juvenile Bureau, I'm going to be speaking a lot about youth today. So that's really, I always like to tell that, obviously from where I work, you guys know that, but just want to make that clear that this is going to be very much youth-centered. Okay, Gal, I'm good. So a little bit about me. I have been with the Juvenile Bureau for a little over 10 years, and I was at Residence Center for Women prior to that. So I've been doing gender-based programming for about 15, 20 years. I run a group in the schools and in shelters and in detention centers called Girl Power. Girl Power is an evidence-based, medically accurate group for young girls that I kind of call tools for their toolbox. I present with a lot of other people in Tulsa. We partner with lots of youth serving agencies. A lot of you are on here with me today. Thank you. And it's really just a time for young people to get together and be led and facilitated, just to be able to talk about stuff and to give them good information and to help prepare them into entering into adulthood. So I see during the regular times, I see about 150 girls a week through our Girl Power groups. And again, it's just a time for young people to be able to open up and hopefully learn. We talk about healthy relationships. We talk about unplanned pregnancies. We talk about STDs, STIs. We discuss different kinds of risk factors that are present in our lives. We talk about grief. We talk about, and it will eventually leads into exploitation and what that can look like. The other part of what I do is I co-chair, along with Sarah Gadd with St. John Ascension, the Oklahoma Coalition Against Trafficking. We started in 2013, actually through our chief judge at the time, Doris Francine, because she was seeing, especially in our juvenile courts, that we were charging a lot of kids. We were charging a lot of kids with crimes when she felt like actually they were actually deprived. And I think that was a great, I think we didn't realize it, that for those of you who don't know, most females come to our detention center or get in trouble for nonviolent offenses, such as stealing, going AWOL, things like that. And some of the things that girls are locked up for right now would not even be a crime if you were an adult. So I like to tell that most of the girls are not, we don't have a lot of violent things. So our judge was seeing that a lot of kids that were actually deprived were considered delinquent. So in 2013, she organized a group of people to start a task force to start looking into child sexual exploitation and human trafficking. We have stayed together as a group. We've gone through a lot of changes. But now in 2019, we just wrote our 3-year strategic plan, which really formalized a lot of our partnerships. We have 40 plus agencies that are currently active with us on our steering committee, as well as a legislative committee, education and training, as well as services. So our OCAT is made up of law enforcement, social services, medical providers, therapists, a lot of agencies and stuff that we feel like shelters that we can work together to be able to best serve victims, whether they be juveniles or adults. So we did that with a lot of intention, and we're pulling together as a group to be able to serve our victims better. Thank you, Gal. We can go on. So just a little bit of other stuff. I usually do live presentations, so I always like to tell the audience, please take care of you. Sometimes if you're new to human trafficking and child sexual exploitation, it can be pretty triggering. There's a lot of stuff about it, so please take care of you. You guys are lucky you're on Zoom. You can walk away. I'll never know. So take care of you. Practice self-care. I talk a lot about my girls. I don't mean my, like as in a possession. I mean that more as the girls that I work with, I really care about them. I like to put that out there because I was called on it one time. And so I always like to say that. You will hear me talk a lot about girls also because that's what I do. I work with girls, but I do know that boys are victims. I know that. I do know that boys are victimized. I do know that it is even more underreported with boys than it is girls. You will also hear me talk a lot about the pimps and the predators, mainly being men. But I do know that women can also be predators as well as pimps. So I knew that. So I already told you it's my first time on Zoom. I also like to say that sometimes my cuss jar tips over and some cuss words fall out. So I don't want to offend anyone on that. I just always want to be upfront about that. And lastly, please know I do have permission from all of the people that I work with to share their stories. Of course, we were not going to be talking about any names, but please know that I have talked about them, and I've talked to them and said, this would really help to maybe educate people about some other kids. So please know I do have permission to talk about stuff. Thank you. I'm ready, gal. So let's define human trafficking, first of all. The U.S. Department of Justice defines human trafficking as a crime that involves exploiting a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. Traffickers use various forms of force, fraud, and coercion to control and exploit their victims. With a juvenile, we do not have to have we do not have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. So, but child sexual exploitation always has these elements. It can include payment in the form of something of value to a child. It is not necessarily always the exchange of money. Please know that this is child abuse. It is being forced to work for the profit of someone else. So the Polaris Project, which is one of the leading people on human trafficking, labor trafficking, if you're not familiar with their website, please take a look. There's all kinds of great data, statistics from all over the United States, and they also operate the human trafficking hotline, which we'll talk about at the end. But Polaris Project also talks about how traffickers use force, fraud, and coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor acts against their will. Again, anyone who is under the age of 18 is always considered a victim. So we always know that there is those elements of force, fraud, and coercion. It just makes it a little more difficult when the person is an adult. So inducing a minor into commercial sex act is considered a form of human trafficking. Again, we always know that the presence of force, fraud, and coercion is present with a minor. Thank you, gal. So again, be clear. Any person under the age of 18 is a victim. They are not a hoe. They are not a thought. They are not a teen prostitute. They are a victim. Under the age of 18, you are a victim. We are fortunate in our state that we do not charge anyone under the age of 18 as a prostitute nor as a recruiter. There are some states that do. So if there is a young person in a detention center somewhere in the state, and that person is not being charged as a prostitute, or that person is not being charged as a recruiter. So I always like to be very clear on that, because we are not charging young people as prostitutes. So get that teen prostitute word out of your mouth. I know most of you don't use it anyway, but I do hear it out in the community. Thank you, gal. So this is on the Polaris website too, and a lot of curriculum that we've worked with. Human trafficking is referred to modern day slavery. Unfortunately, there are more slaves in our country than when slavery was legal. Slavery is really just being forced to work. So these victims and these people are being forced to work for little or no money, maybe in exchange for things, and oftentimes promise things that never really happen. Thank you. Let's go on to some facts. So I want to share a couple of things. Also on my time off, go back a little bit, please. Yeah. Just to the facts. You're good. At my time working from home, I've also been listening to a lot of webinars. There's some great stuff out there. I'll highlight a couple of them at the end. So I pulled some facts from there and also some things that we've known for a while. So 90% of girls and women in the life right now have had a history of child abuse. It's a huge rich risk factor, excuse me. Children victimized earlier in childhood are 4 times more likely to be targeted for exploitation. So those of you that work with kids, if you know about early victimization, child abuse early on in someone's life, please know that they are more at risk for exploitation. Many of our victims that we know have been exploited were unfortunately first victimized in their own homes. The average age for a victim to enter the life is 13 years old. Rights for Girls recently reported on one of their, on some data that they've been doing, that 1 in 6 victims was younger than 12 at the first time of exploitation. Children who leave their homes or leave their places of care are approached within 48 hours unless they seek a safe place. So if they're headed to the streets and they really, or if they're couch surfing and they end up on the streets, they are approached by a predator within 48 hours is the average length of time. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. This is huge. It makes a lot of money. So please know that we're talking about people who, this is their business. This is a lot of money. And unfortunately, the United States is the #1 consumer. We buy more people than any other civilized nation in the world. Girls of color are disproportionately victimized. And the majority of victims in our country are our own citizens. You will hear things about how, especially now, about people are coming across from the border, absolutely. But we know that most of the people that are being victimized within our country are our own citizens. So that's, you know, that's bothersome. And it's not taken. It's not the big black van rolls up with the windows and throws the kid in the back seat and drives off. It's very different than that. So again, please know that these are our kids that are being victimized. They're our citizens. A recent study of 785 prostituted people, 92% of those people reported that while they were in the life, they were either shot, strangled, sexually assaulted, stabbed, burned, or physically abused, either by pimps or Johns. And Johns are buyers. So I like to share some of that with you because I need us to know that this is a problem and it isn't the ultimate form of child abuse. So I'm good, Gal. We can go on to the risk factors. Risk factors, most of you that are on here with me know this probably. I do want to talk a little bit more about this. Youth missing from care. We call this AWOL. I like to call it missing from care. Missing from care simply means that a child has been asked to stay somewhere or perhaps placed somewhere and they decide to leave. So they clearly are missing from care. Polaris reports that running away or missing from care is the #1 vulnerability for youth in both labor and sex trafficking. The National Human Trafficking Hotline and the Hotline for Missing Children believe that 1 in 6 reports of endangered runaways are likely to be a victim of exploitation. You can go on some of the websites too and pull a lot of the data off. We didn't have a lot of time to discuss that today. You can see who's making reports. It's generally a caring adult, somebody like us, somebody that's out working with kids and feels like there's something wrong and needs to make a report. Unfortunately for us, a number of victims are being exploited in their own homes, so they are never reported. And in Oklahoma, familial trafficking is the #1 way children are being exploited, meaning that they are being exploited by someone that they know or someone within their family unit. So let's talk about exposure to trauma in childhood. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ACE scores. The higher the ACE scores, the worse the outcomes generally for your health. I believe last time I looked, Oklahoma had an average ACE score of about 4, which is pretty high. If you are not familiar with the ACE scores, please go Google it. There's a lot of research about there, a lot of research right now linking, obviously, trauma in childhood with ACE scores. History of abuse and neglect. I shared with you a little bit before that oftentimes the victims of exploitation have already suffered from abuse and neglect in their own home. So that's a big risk factor for our youth. Lastly, system involved means my system, DHS. That is a huge, huge risk factor for kids. And let's think about it, because oftentimes kids who enter the juvenile justice system, Department of Human Services system, unfortunately, we tend to re-victimize them again. We put them in a detention center, we put them on probation, we put them in a group home, we put them different places. So, you know, right, wrong, good or bad, sometimes we are re-victimizing our victims. So kids that are system involved, generally are more at risk, again, of being exploited. Prior and ongoing, sorry, I don't have this in order. Prior and ongoing sexual abuse, huge red flag. And domestic violence through direct experience and or exposure. A couple of weeks ago, I listened to a fabulous webinar that was but with two survivors and who had been in the life for 10 plus years. And one of the survivors had made a comment about when she had grown up in a very abusive home and had watched her mother suffer a lot of domestic violence at the hands of a stepfather. And she made the comment the first time that her pimp beat her, she made the comment that said, "Oh, I guess I'm an adult now." So it becomes something that, you know, it normalizes it, maybe becomes something that person becomes used to. Lack of educational, employment, and economic opportunities. Again, another big risk factor for youth, because if you don't have that safe place into the schools, if you don't have that opportunity to become employed, you look for other avenues. Untreated mental health struggles, huge one. We're finding a lot of kids, especially that are system involved, do have many untreated mental health struggles. Addiction, clear pathway into being exploited. Again, it's another way that pimps or predators can have control over their victim. And then we have some that are unique to the individual, maybe through the community, food insecurities, drugs, gangs, neighborhoods where there aren't a lot of other opportunities, and also we're finding in the rural neighborhoods that this can definitely be a risk factor. And then societal risk factors, porn. There was actually an excellent webinar on porn a couple of weeks ago called Growing Up in the Age of Porn, and how it actually can change your brain. And so we know that people who watch porn, that can definitely be a risk factor. Gender-based violence, it's all around us. We see that all the time. Cultural beliefs, and then in through the media. So just thinking about, and again, these are just some risk factors. I believe that most kids are at risk. There are a lot of kids that have these risk factors. I am mainly in the trenches. So really what I am trying to communicate today to you is actually things that we know through data and through evidence, but also just through a number of kids that I've worked with and what they've talked to me about and things that I know that they struggle with. Thank you, Gal. So let's talk a little about grooming. Predators prey on vulnerable youth. It is intentional, and there is a strategy to recruit and retain. Some of you have heard me talk before. A few years ago, I listened to a webinar called Inside the Mind of a Human Trafficker. And there was a man on there who referred to himself as Pimpin' Ken. And he actually he says he has a website called, and excuse me, I'm going to use a bad word here, How to Break a Bitch. And it's really actually a formula on how to find kids' vulnerabilities. And then once you find those vulnerabilities, how to go in. And those of us that work with youth, I mean, sometimes vulnerabilities are easy to find. If things are going south at my house and I'm a 14-year-old girl and I decide I'm going to leave, but I'm not going to go to safe place because I got this and I can make it on the streets. Remember, I'm going to be approached. I'm probably hungry. I may want to get high. I definitely would like to do some hygiene. So again, it's intentional. Predators look for that. They see me out there. They know that that's what I want. And maybe things are not great at my house. So I'm also leaving my house with a head full of trauma. So once I get to those streets and someone approaches me and asks me, hey, do I want to get high? Do I want something to eat? Would I like to take a shower? Of course I want to. And, again, predators are smart. They're maybe not send that big old scary guy to come talk to me, but maybe they'll send somebody my age, somebody that looks like me, maybe a woman, somebody that I would feel more comfortable going with. So in that, if I am, if I'm willing to go and stay at somebody's house so I can eat and things, but then is that free? Probably not. One of the girls I used to work with and used to tell me all the time, Miss Paula, it's all good. Lots of people ask me to get in the car and smoke a blunt. It's all right. It's all good. Until one day the guy that was, smoking the blunt with her started reaching over and touching her. So I mean, it's just that, but that's why we have to talk to our kids about what this looks like and why people are out there trying to groom us. So underlying vulnerabilities can really set up a victim to believe that they are not worthy of being loved. So let's go on to methods of control. Thank you. So Methods of control. Let's talk about this. Love and attention. You know, as a female, I go back to my junior high school days. We all like that. We like to be loved. We like to have attention, especially if you're kind of struggling with low self-esteem anyway, or maybe you're just kind of struggling with life. I know that in my middle school years, that was a tough time for me, as with a lot of kids. So I think that, you know, if someone would have reached out to me, I'm 60 years old. I'm grateful we didn't have the internet when I was growing up, because I probably would have fallen prey to it. So I think that, you know, if somebody would have hit me up, especially if I would have had a bad day, or if I had a fight with my parents, or I didn't make cheerleader, or I was really struggling, or if all my friends but me had a boyfriend and somebody would have hit me up, hey, baby girl, you're great, probably would have answered back till my mom came in my room and shut me down. But so I want you to see that, you know, again, pimps know what they're doing. They are reaching out. They know the vulnerabilities. So be careful what people put out online. Physical control. This is a big one. We've actually worked with victims that were physically held. One of our first victims that we worked with was actually chained to a cage. So the physical control does happen. A lot of the times it's psychological. We put fear, but physical control is one of the methods of controls that predators use to hold their victims. Let's talk about blackmail. This can oh, sorry, you can go back, Gal. Yeah, blackmail. This happens a lot of times when people send pictures, or when things like that. You know, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to put that picture out on the internet. It also addiction. Predators love to get their victims addicted as well. That's another way of holding on to you. I can hold these drugs if you don't do what I want. How badly do you want this? So methods of control can come into blackmail. Also criminal. I attended a nationwide conference last year in Cincinnati where a lot of survivors spoke. And that's one of their biggest concerns right now, is trying to clear off their criminal record. You know, pimps made them do things that were criminal. And so now, and unfortunately, when they were an adult, one of the survivors we listened to last week was saying that she had some criminal charges and all states are different. I just learned this from this webinar in Arizona, but it for some reason, it takes like 99 years to ever get them expunged off your record. So this person will never be able, you know, I mean, and as you all know, with criminal records, that prevents you from getting jobs, with housing, things like that. So there's an equality model going on right now too. And if you want to Google it, it's equalitymodelus.org. And they're doing some great things to try to help people, the survivors that are coming out of the life, that unfortunately a lot of these things happened to them when they were in the life. So we're really trying to make it easier for people to be survivors. Right now, it's very difficult. So again, breaking down the child, the methods of control, breaking down that child through isolation. This is a big one. Don't want you talking to people. You don't need to be hanging out with your friends. Why are you talking to them? You just need to hang out here with me. Intermittent good and bad, which really is, that's a tough one, because, you know, that way maybe what the child is used to at home as well. So, you know, I'm going to be nice to you for a minute, and then I'm really not going to. So think back about domestic violence. Get that in your head too. You know, the domestic violence piece is very relevant here. Breaking down the child through perceived kindness. Maybe you'll buy them some stuff. We'll go get some things. We'll go do something fun. A lot of our victims have that perceived inability to leave. You know, they put this in your brain that you can't go anywhere, nor do you want to go anywhere. Pimps are good at destructing the self. A lot of our victims have felt like that they weren't worthy of anything. There's a lot of shame. I'm not worthy of someone to love me. I deserve this. So really just breaking down that self. Withholding wants and needs is a huge thing of power and control. So unless you do this, you know, I won't do this. I had some victims a couple of years ago that had a very mean pimp. And they reported to me that when they were juveniles, that he used to put them in the back of his car when he would get mad at them. And these two girls had spent a lot of time in juvenile detention, so they knew what it was like. And he would put them in the back of his car, and he would drive them down to where our juvenile detention facility and tell them he was going to take them into juvie if they didn't behave. You know, they probably knew that probably couldn't, and legally he can't. But, you know, they didn't know that. They didn't want to go back to juvie. They knew what that was like. So again, it's that, you know, I'm going to do all of this stuff to you just to keep you under here. And the emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is huge. Because, you know, in a brain that's full of emotions, pimps know how to get in there and emotionally abuse that. All right, Gal, I'm good. I'm sorry, I had a phone call. So shame and exploitation can become normal, and a strong emotional connection can result, in which we all know that as trauma bonding. We've seen this with domestic violence victims of trauma bonding. We know that it is real. Some people have called it Stockholm Syndrome. I have seen it with a number of the victims that I have worked with. Trauma bonding, again, it's that strong emotional connection. So this can happen. A lot of our victims deny the violence. A lot of our victims think that they actually deserved it, or it becomes normal. A lot of victims seek to keep the exploiter happy, even hypervigilant to their needs. Remember, we're bringing some PTSD in before even the exploitation. So that hypervigilance to the exploiter's needs, we should not be surprised. The fantasy and the illusion that perhaps the victim and the predator are a team, and maybe, you know, that they love each other. Oftentimes, the predator and the victim can bond through similar experiences. A long time ago, I worked with a young lady who was at the Laura Dester shelter, who was being exploited, and she used to defend her pimp all the time to me. And she would say, "Oh, Miss Paula, you know, he had a really bad childhood, or things, you know, were really bad for him. And so I can understand why he's doing things like this. And what else is he going to do?" So again, you know, bonding through those similar experiences. She would even see the exploiter as a good guy or even a victim. Again, you know, well, he had a really bad life. What else can he do? And also we find through trauma bonding that the victims can love that parent or that person that's doing this harm to them, but really hate what they're doing to them. I recently worked with a victim who really put this into perspective. We were talking about these things, and, you know, this young lady actually believed that this person cared for her and was going to take care of her and was her boyfriend. And she used some words that I've never used before, which I would like to share. And I think this is great. And she said, "He put me under a spell." And I think that's a great way to describe it, because it's, you know, and those were her words. She's like, "I felt like I was under a spell," which I think is a really strong way to talk about that feeling. Okay, good. Thank you, Gal. So, sorry, I'm trying to check the time because all my stuff is off. Why won't victims self-identify? Oftentimes, they don't believe they're being victims. That has been the one thing that I think that we have come across the most on the things that when we get disclosures from young people, because they really don't think they are victims. So I told you earlier about the two survivors that I listened to on a webinar a couple weeks ago. It's called Let's Get Real Through Now and Next, if any of you want to do. It's Rebecca Bender and Becca Charleston. Some of you may be familiar with them. They are rock stars, and they're writing books, and they're doing all kinds of things. But Rebecca Bender, they met when they were both being victimized. They had different pimps. They ended up being together. So they bonded together a lot when especially during their victimization. Rebecca got out earlier, and she shared a story during this webinar just a couple of weeks ago, that she said that she went to Becca after Becca got, you know, they were together, and Rebecca said, "Hey, I think we were trafficked," because Rebecca had gotten out and gotten some services. And so I think through services, she started to understand, hey, we weren't like doing this of our own free will. Coercion also can look like a choice. I think after she talked about how she got services, she realized, hey, I didn't have a choice. I thought I had a choice, but I really didn't. So she talks that after she found Becca again, she said, "Hey, I think we were trafficked." And Becca said, "No, we're just hoes. We're just prostituting. We weren't being trafficked." And I love this. And Rebecca said, "No, you know, I'm pretty sure my husband or my boyfriend would not drag me through the house or beat me if I told him I couldn't go to work that day." She's like, "We were being trafficked." You know, who does that other than a pimp? And she said that, you know, she would say, "I don't feel like going to work today." I mean, that's what would happen. So I really like the way that she put that, because it kind of makes us think about, okay, really, is that what your husband or boyfriend or partner or girlfriend would do to you if you got up one morning and said, I'm sorry, I can't go to work? I'm hoping they wouldn't drag you through the house and beat you for not being able to go to work. Again, victims don't self-identify because they don't think they're being victimized. One of the first victims I used to work with used to tell me all the time, hey, Miss Paula, nobody's making me do this. I'm good at having sex, might as well get stuff for it. That was her idea. She thought she was running the show. She never thought that she was being victimized. Another one of the victims we've recently been working with shared with me, she's like, well, you know, I always had a choice. I always had a choice. But the choices that she often had were oftentimes two bad choices. So sometimes we feel like we have a choice when really we don't. And coercion can look a lot like a choice, especially in the mind of a traumatized young child. Okay, I'm good, gal. So, why don't victims leave? Okay, sorry, bear with me. I have too many pieces of paper. Oftentimes victims don't leave because that's the best place they've been. Remember, if you're juvenile justice involved, if you're DHS involved, you may be moved from home to home, from placement to placement, from shelter to shelter. Maybe this is the best place that you've ever been. You have the same bed to sleep in every day. Maybe you're going to get food and all of those things. So sometimes they've told me, you know what, this is the best I've had it, which is sad, but that can be a reason why. Why don't victims leave? Fear. Fear is real. We've had many victims not be able to report because they are truly, truly, truly fearful of their predator, because they have made it very clear what they will do to them. One of the victims that we have worked with in the past said that her pimp made her stand outside one day and watch him throw an animal into the fire. He wanted to let her know that, you know, he was in charge. Threats. Victims don't leave because they're threatened. And oftentimes they have nowhere to go. You know, I think we as adults, we can be like, well, heck, you know, but if you're a child, especially if you're a child involved in the system, you don't get to make a lot of your own choices. So sometimes kids that we've worked with literally have nowhere else to go. Warrants and run reports. Hey, that's a real thing, especially in my system. So, you know, we had a victim years ago who had been in our system for years and been in DHS for years. And, you know, she'd pretty much grown up in my juvenile detention center or in a group home or in a shelter or something. So we had placed her in a safe place for a while, and she decided she didn't want to be there anymore. Excuse me. So I'm going to make this really quick, but she decided to leave one day. She was tired of being there. She thought she was fine. She didn't really want to hang out there much longer. So I'm going to make this real brief, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how, you know, I think this will put everything together for you. So when she decided to leave, she left her place where we'd asked her to stay, full well knowing that a warrant would be issued. So she was knowing that. So, you know, she's like, oh, man, I don't want to go back to juvie. I'm going to take my chances on the streets. So she actually got into a car with someone she thought she knew. And then they stopped again, and another grown person got in the car. But to remember, we have a 14-year-old traumatized brain girl not going back to juvie. I'm going to take my chances on the street. You know, it ended up that she was in the car with 4 grown people, and they ended up at a hotel room. Things went terribly bad there. She was very much victimized. But the good news is we ended up catching up, and the man that did all of these horrible, horrible things to her got 84 years because she did end up testifying and stuff. And I have to leave out a lot of the things in between. But again, I like to highlight that because she was a victim, and she was like, I'm not going back to juvie. I know what that looks like. So please keep in mind that sometimes, you know, her choices, she had 2 bad choices. She chose the one that she thought, but please, you know, and I say that too, not to blame the victim. It would be really easy to blame her. It would be really easy to say, well, what did she think was going to happen when she got in that car? Or what did she think was going to happen when she ran from there? She knows the streets aren't safe. Or what did she think was going to happen when she ended up in that hotel room with 4 grown men? I mean, I think it's real easy for us to look back and say, well, come on now. You know, but we really have to be careful not to blame the victim, because we've got to peel back those layers and understand what was going on in her life as to what, you know, as to why she decided to leave and why she made those choices. Oh, sorry, you can go back to the, why don't they leave? Sorry, gal. I didn't do a very good job for you on the slides. Back. You're okay. Well, yeah, perfect. Distrust of law enforcement and social services. Pimps are really good at this. They like to tell kids, well, you know, you go to YST, you know, you'll just go to DHS. You know, those people are going to get you caught up there. You know, most of the kids that I work with in juvenile justice already don't like the police. So because most of their encounters have not been positive, maybe even for themselves or for family members or things like that. So pimps like to put that in their head too. It's like, hey man, you don't want to go anywhere. You know, they'll just arrest you, or you know, you'll just end up going back to juvie, or you'll just end up going back to, you know, some place that you don't want to be. You might as well stay here with me. So again, building that distrust and shame. Shame is huge. And pimps like to tell them this too. You know, who's going to want you? You're all used up now. You're not any good. So again, it's that shame. And oftentimes they don't leave because they are in love with the person and they think the person loves them. A lot of the victims we've worked with actually call the person that is victimizing them and exploiting them their boyfriend. And they believe that that person does care about them. So these are some reasons too why people do not leave their circumstances. Okay, I'm good, gal. So child sexual exploitation can be devastating for a child. We know from data that 7 years is about the longest time that kids survive in the life. Unfortunately, the biggest causes of death are homicide and suicide. And the 2 survivors that I shared a little bit about with you earlier, they said something in their webinar that was huge. And one of them was just on another show, and I heard her repeat it the other day. And she said, you know, being in the life is, let me get her quote. She said, being in the life is like you are playing Russian roulette every time you knock on a hotel door. They shared that almost as much harm came from Johns, people who are buying sex, than from their pimps. And she also shared, which I had been saying for a long time, and I was really happy to hear a survivor say this, you know, no one wants to wake up and have sex with multiple men. This is not a choice. And that's when coercion can feel like a choice. And that's what we talk about too, in that people that are involved, that are prostituted people right now, it is our belief that the victimization started when they were young and they just haven't been able to get out of the life. Unfortunately for us, the rules change when people become 18 and you can be charged as a prostitute. Our committee, which is made up of law enforcement also, we're working really, really hard to help law enforcement to be able to dig down and peel back those layers and not just put someone in jail just because that they found that they're a prostitute. You know, we find that there is it's that devastation, it's that stuff underneath that we don't know about. So that's why we have to be very aware of what all of the kids and stuff are going through. So again, it can be devastating for a child. Drug and alcohol addiction. Pimps love to get their kids hooked on drugs and alcohol. It's another way of control. Maybe the child enters, you know, into that life struggling with addiction. Makes it even easier for the pimp to control them. So devastating again for the child is depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, some of our victims they test positive for HIV, uncurable STDs that they cannot get rid of. Self-injury, suicide attempts, re-victimization once they become adults, health, both physical, mental. We find all kinds of complications as they grow older because their bodies have been used many, many times. Some victims some survivors that we have met as adults now. Sorry, of course, I'm on low power mode. Some people that we have met, survivors we've met as adults now tell us that, you know, they can't have healthy relationships emotionally. Some people can no longer have children because of the abuse that they have suffered at the hands of during their exploitation. Oftentimes, criminal records can follow them along. I briefly touched on that into adulthood, things that they had done maybe in their early adulthood at the hands of their pimp or their exploiter now have, now they have criminal records they have to deal with, which again prevents you from getting housing, jobs, things like that. Credit issues. One of the women at the conference in Cincinnati reported that, she couldn't do anything. Her credit was so bad because her pimp had made her sign up for all of these different things and then not pay things. Her credit went south. It takes years to repair that, and now that she has to struggle with that and the shame and the humiliation of just what had to happen while they were being victimized. Okay, Gal. So what to be aware of. Possible red flags. We talked a little bit about history of missing from care. Again, number one, if you work with kids, they're not around, where have you been? This makes it easier for me during the school year because I see the kids once a week. So, if kids haven't been absent or kids have been absent for a while, I start asking questions with other girls in the group. Ask kids where their friends are. They're the best source of information. Just make conversation. Another red flag could possibly be involvement with older or new groups of people. Maybe you start to see them shift, hanging out with different people, maybe people that are older. Red flags for me are people that really don't use their own names. So, it's those are the things to kind of look for. Talk to the kids you work with about that. Histories of STDs, unplanned pregnancies, that can also be a red flag. Disconnection from friends and family and activities. Remember, we talked a little bit earlier about how pimps like to isolate you. That's one of the methods of control. Also with domestic violence, child abuse, they all go hand in hand. So again, that disconnection, because we don't want anybody to be talking about this. We do see sometimes some unexplained tattoos. I always ask kids about their tats. Usually if it's something that they love, they want to talk about it. So that could be a red flag if they don't want to talk about it. It's called branding. We see it on necks. We see it on wrists. So talk to kids about their tattoos. Unexplained cash and or upgrades in phones, clothing, hair, accessories. Talk to the kids you work with about that. Hey, man, how are you getting all that? How are you doing that new iPhone? Be careful not to judge. But I think, just talk about it. When kids get new stuff, they want to talk about it. Unexplained absences from school, work, or maybe increased unexplained absences. We find that with a lot of times. Remember, it's that isolation piece. If a child is being victimized, the pimp certainly doesn't want them going to school or going to work or going around their friends and talking about what's going on. Restricted movement or controlled communication. That can be a big one too. Oftentimes you don't have your own ID, you don't have your phone. So this is something that the pimps like to control your movement, like to control your communication. We're also finding that gangs like to victimize. I'm not dissing gangs, know a lot of kids that are in gangs, but this is a safer way for gangs to make money because gangs generally run drugs and do dirt. So it's harder unless this person, real quick, I'll use my example. If I'm rolling down the street and I have a 14-year-old boy next to me and we get pulled over and I tell him to keep his mouth shut, chances are good the officer's just going to write me a ticket for speeding or broken taillight or whatever and let me roll on down the road and I can continue to sell this kid. If I'm that same gang member rolling down the street with, a couple ounces or whatever cocaine in my glove box and he has probable cause and stops me and searches my car, I'm going to jail. So I've just been shut down and he's going to confiscate my drugs. So again, this is an easier way to make money because if you can convince your victim that they are not being victimized or that you can let them know that they cannot talk about it, there's really not a lot that law enforcement can do unless they get that victim to disclose. So, all righty. Thanks, Gal. I'm ready for the next one. So here's the good news. What can we do? Survivors have reported numerous times that they wish people would ask more questions. Stay in their face, ask questions, talk about things. They said that people just dropped, they didn't ask enough questions. And sometimes we don't, we fear that. So I'm reporting what survivors have told me, ask those questions. So because they say that's, you're staying in that relationship, you're saying that you care. Maybe that's that one person that they need. Okay, I'm good, Gal. So what can you do? Oh, relationships. time and time again, I've heard this in webinars, and time again through all of the research we have found that, you know, relationships are huge important, especially with girls. Girls are relational. They like relationship. They like to talk about stuff. They like to do things. So unconditional positive regard. Please, when you're working with victims, please let them know whatever you tell me will not change my opinion of you. Be careful on victim blaming. I think, you know, it's easy to do. Be really careful when not to blame the victim for things that maybe she did not have a choice. He or she, sorry. See, I work with girls too much. Defining the relationship from the victim's view. This is huge important. If the victim says this was her boyfriend, then you need to roll with it. You can't, I mean, you will shut the victim down if all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that guy's not your boyfriend. He treats you like shit. I mean, you've got to roll with what the victim says. We have to focus on the safety and the reality of the situation. And please focus on harm reduction. This is huge. You know, because as bad as we want a kid to stay at our shelter, or as bad as we want a kid to stay at our group home so that we can provide services for them, if they want to run, they're going to run. And chances are they might run back to that same place. So let's talk about harm reduction. Hey, do you have my telephone number? Do you have condoms? Is your phone charged? Let's talk about those harm reduction strategies and build coping skills. We have to replace those negative behaviors with positive behaviors. You know, we can't take everything away and then expect the kid to be like, oh yeah, it's all good, when they have nothing to do. So break down that isolation by providing and encouraging other relationships with other people, other activities. Ask them what they enjoy doing. You know, think outside the box. Get them a membership to a gym. Join a book club. You know, things that are just think outside the box. Of course, we need therapy. Of course, we need case managers. Of course, we need things like that to help that child recover. But again, think outside of the box. Where can we provide other relationships for this young person to grow? Okay, I'm good, gal. So, report. Huge. Anyone under the age of 18? Do you believe anyone is under the age of 18? That is a mandatory DHS referral. We are all mandatory reporters in the state of Oklahoma. So please make that report. Stress the word human trafficking. Also, we have had great success with the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can see the number on your screen. This is Polaris. They are hooked up with all law enforcement advocates, everything, all over the United States. So I recently had a call 2 days ago from a woman that I worked with here in Tulsa, and she had a call from a woman in Washington who believed that her 4-year-old granddaughter was being exploited online. And so she said, what do I do? And I said, my gosh, call Polaris, make a report. So, you know, again, remember, we always report, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They are great. They have unlimited resources. So if you fear something is wrong and you don't know what to do, let them help you walk through that time. Okay, gal? And that's me. And sorry, I was a little disheveled today. Haven't been working from home too long. So I appreciate you guys coming and joining me today. Please reach out. Let's all work together to help provide recovery and to help provide resources and interventions and preventions for the kids in our community. It's really important that we go and advocate and support them. So I'm good. Does anybody have questions?
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. It was very, very interesting, and it seems like it's never enough to hear about this subject. I just lost you.
I'm here. I'm here.
Ah, you are here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will stop share so we can see. I'll be able to see everyone. Great. Can you see more of us right now?
I can see you, gal.
Ah, okay. Okay, so do we have any questions, Paul?
If not, cool.
Well, we have a lot of comments, a lot of thank you, wonderful, great presentation and information. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
It was great.
It was
Excellent.
great, even that it was from your phone, and it was very interesting. Thank you. And we can see your experience that brought us a lot of information. So thank you.
Thank you. If anybody's still on, please reach out to Gal and myself. We would love to work together.
Definitely.
Are we good?
Yeah, we are good. Thank you, Paula, so much. Thank you all for participating. People here are waving for you, but I understand that you cannot. You can open the mic, and then Paula will be able to see you.